our performance mode's a mistake. They made a lot of sense with the Pro consoles and during the cross-gen period. However, they've become expected to the point that developers will be criticized for not including a 60 FPS mode. Some people have unrealistic expectations of what is essentially 2020 mid-range hardware. It's natural that developers will want to push the hardware more as the generation goes on, but may feel held back due to having to accommodate a 60 FPS mode. This felt like the case with Final Fantasy XVI, where the performance mode felt like a last-minute panicked addition that was clearly asking too much. As a PC user, I love HFR as much as the next person, but on consoles we need to be sensible with expectations and also give developers the freedom to use the hardware how they see fit for their creative ambitions. A lock 30 with good frame pacing makes a lot of sense. John?
Always the voice of reason, Jake. I'd say the problem is less the performance modes and more the problem with the way communities behave these days about this stuff. I think developers should be able to set whatever target they realistically can deliver as long as that target is maintained and consistent, right?
Right.
Like Final Fantasy 16 is a case where I would argue I would agree with him that it feels like the performance mode was tacked on at the last minute. And the problem with that is that hitting 60 FPS or hitting your target requires this. It's like a holistic thing from the beginning of development where
Yes.
everyone needs to be on board with that target early on in order to optimize for it. And if you're not doing that, you can't just throw it in. And it feels like 16 definitely just had it thrown in at the end and it's like not able to hit that target. And so it's bad. So they probably should have just left it out. But I do think that it's still something to offer. And if the developer can realistically hit it and deliver a good performance and a good quality mode, then I think it's absolutely something that should be included because different people have different priorities on that stuff. I think the PlayStation examples are still the best, especially like the stuff that we've seen from like Insomniac. They're just like, whatever. If you want a perfectly locked 30 with perfect frame pacing and like the highest visuals, here you go. You can have a 40 FPS mode. You can have a quality mode, uncapped, but with VRR. You can have a 60 FPS mode. You can have a performance mode that goes over 60 with VRR. You can have it with RT on or off in some cases. Like, I think that's great to offer that choice. And I wouldn't want to see that go away because they actually delivered the goods. But if
Right.
basically bad mode shouldn't be in there is I think the point. But if you can do it, then it should be there. And I think this gen has actually been pretty good overall in terms of 60 FPS compared to the last two generations. There's way more 60 frames per second console games than we'd seen in a long time since the PS2 era, I would say. It feels like most games these days do by default run at 60 or at least have a 60 option. It's actually
Right.
fairly uncommon when something's capped to 30. And I think it's okay if it's capped to 30. It's not optimal, but you know, if there's a reason for it, I can be accepting of that. Like for Starfield, for instance, it didn't really bother me that it was capped at 30 on Xbox. And like I said, 16, I would have been happier. I recommended the quality mode. I honestly think that putting a performance mode in was a mistake because it made the game feel less polished than it actually was if you used that mode. So I don't know. What do you guys think of this?
I mean, yeah, I pretty much would echo everything you would say. And I also think Jake's right to say that certain technical ambitions a game might have, especially from the beginning of the project, like if you say like, we want this game to have some sort of level of interactivity in the world that other games don't typically do, but it's going to necessitate we target 33 milliseconds per frame. I think that's a reasonable thing to do for a console platform. It's not, I wouldn't play the game there necessarily as a result, but I think that's the consumer's choice in the end, and they shouldn't necessarily just force developers to do a 60 FPS mode. You can force the developer with your buying the game or not buying the game, but then like making like a whole storm on Twitter about it or something. Like, I don't know. Not my
Something
thing.
else I want to add to this, though, there was talk about Dragon's Dogma 2 this week where they're like, oh yeah, it's just going to be unlocked. And I think that's a case where
That was
yeah,
said?
that was said. It's variable frame rate. So
Oh
yeah,
no,
right. And
that's bad.
so I agree that an unlocked frame rate should be available in those cases, and I think it's okay to offer that on consoles, especially for forward-looking hardware. But for the day one experience, if you're running with a very unstable frame rate, and maybe it won't be, but all previous stuff has been, they should offer a capped 30 option, totally optional, but it should still be there, I think, for consistent.
This is such a Capcom thing to do. What is this? Like,
I don't know.
They do this No Man's Land frame rate stuff way too often.
Yeah, it's not good.
Like, I'm really afraid Dragon's Dogma 2 on console is going to be. They said they're pushing RT in it on PC, so it's probably going to target RT on console as well too, based on their presentations. Like, I don't think this thing's a constant 60 at all.
And
like,
so
offer a frame rate
at
cap.
the very least, so on Xbox, because if you run in 120 hertz mode, you get the large range of VRR, so VRR users should be okay. PlayStation could be okay if they implement the 120 mode as well, which they've done before. But if they allow it to run in 120, then they can have low frame rate compensation. But if it's just a 60 hertz game, this could be a real mess on the PS5.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, basically we've got a lot of demands being placed on developers. We've had, calls for more physically, active games that's going to require a lot of CPU, which basically limits you to 30, 40 at that point. And then, I'm just went back through the supporter questions, and there's this one from Roach. Hi DF, why do you think some developers of AAA cross-platform games are content with the resolution dropping as low as 720p on PS5 and Series X? Using DRS that was considered the target for an Xbox 360 that was released 18 years ago. In 2024, shouldn't developers be targeting a minimum of 1440p as an example? So we don't get the blurry mess we've been seeing in some games. I say leave the high-end effects like ray tracing for high-end PC and give console players games that don't drop to sub 30 FPS, preferably 60, with resolutions dropping below 900p. Well, this is the thing, right? Everybody wants different things from their games, and ultimately we've got to trust the developers in what they're doing, and assuming that they know what they're doing and what's best for the consumer. I'm thinking of games with performance modes like, for example, Alan Wake 2 and Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, which do bottom out 720p internal, but I still think those performance modes are good things to have, right? I'd rather they were there than not there, but at the same time, if it's limiting the creative vision, I do think we have to respect the developer's decision on that one. But yes, I do see that there is an expectation level there and a certain sense of entitlement. Really going to be interesting to see what happens when GTA 6 comes out, because similar to Starfield, I just don't think 60 is going to be viable there. Yeah. I am curious about Starfield, whether it will get that performance upgrade at some point, even if it's like VRR only. I'd really like to see that. I think it could be all right.
I think so.
I think based on that PC experience, I think that would be completely all right.